As you saw in the title, I think the Rings of Power so far is pretty underwhelming. Now, I'm not saying the show is bad. I think currently it's kind of just alright. The reason why it's hard to dislike the show is that the production value and spectacle is immense. Almost every shot has a sweeping vista in the background that really grounds us into this massive world. Even scenes that don't really require to be set in this setting, like Elrond chilling on a tree, are, and that really goes to show the creators trying their hardest to immerse us in Middle-earth. This feels like Amazon spraying out money like J-Pal pumping the economy full of cash, but because of this, the scope to me is fully realized and the massive budget thoroughly helps in that regard. I also like the map transition shots, where it gives us a sense of the world's geography, and it's a good way to transition from area to area. For me, I'm not a major Lord of the Rings nerd and have essentially just watched the movies multiple times, so I don't know all of the lore and book material. So going in, I'm not very familiar with all the terrain, politics, and cities. So on the basis of introducing the audience to all of that, it was a little overwhelming, and a lot of the dialogue was expository and plot-oriented. To me, that was by far my biggest gripe with the first 2 episodes, because when you primarily have expository dialogue, you don't allow a lot of room for character development. Like, so far, I can't really pin that many characteristics on most of the characters that have been giving a lot of screen time. And even the characters that were set up are pretty stereotypical and don't have that much depth to them. Like Nori being a stereotypical kid who wants to break tradition and is adventurous. Galadriel is vengeance obsessed and only wants to kill orcs. And then Arondir is like a walking robot from how expressionless he is, and even when he's with someone he loves, he's still very expressionless. Which, on the subject of Arondir dating Bronwyn, he said that he's been watching over this territory for 75 years. So, although we don't know if Bronwyn has been in this area for most of her life, I hope that doesn't mean that Arondir has known her since she's been a child and is now dating her, because that would be very weird and unsettling. But we don't know the details of their relationship, so let's get back to talking about the character work. So from the fact that there isn't much character development and the characters themselves are pretty stereotypical, they come off so far as uninteresting. Most of the scenes with them, I'm finding myself getting bored a bit as my eyes slowly glaze over. Like the scene where Nori and her friends are munching on berries was almost pointless, and the wolf they briefly show sniffing around better show up again. Then we have Elrond, who didn't have much to do in the first episode, but in the second episode, his dynamic with Prince Durin was kind of interesting. I like the scenario of elves losing a sense of time from their immortality and missing certain aspects of a mortal's lifetime. It made for a good and genuine conflict, even though Durin was dragging things out and was acting like a kid. Now, in regards to the quality of writing, it feels very inconsistent. I don't outright hate it like some people do, because there are genuinely some quality lines here and there. As a few examples, there's, "I admire all who can see into the mystery of things, who can divine from the plainness of what is, the beauty of what could be. Where there is love, it is never truly dark. For the same wind that seeks to blow out to fire may also cause it spread." These to me are pretty good, but again, there's so much exposition, it inherently drags down the quality of writing. Within the same sphere of characters, we also have acting, and I also feel like it's pretty flawed. I touched on how one-note Arondir is, and his relationship with Bronwyn feels like it has no chemistry so far. But other characters like Galadriel and Nori feel like they are over-exaggerating their performances. In this scene with Galadriel, where she's talking to Elrond and is starting to cut deep, all she is doing is holding this single wide-eyed facial expression, and there's 2 shots that hold on it with no dialogue, and it felt really silly. This in comparison to Rhaenyra in House of the Dragon, who shows so many subtleties in her performance, blows Galadriel out of the water. And naturally I'm going to be drawing comparisons between these 2 shows since they're releasing at the same time and they're both fantasies. Then for Nori, it's probably just her character and not necessarily her acting, but she is always in a constant state of amazement that it never allows for her character to have a lot of range. I know she has an optimistic view of the world, but it is pretty exhausting when she is always in that headspace. Because of this, I'm kind of just waiting for something dark to happen to this character to fundamentally change her worldview and thus make her more intriguing. So, as a complete batch of characters, it's not impressive, and if they all aren't that interesting, then you'll quickly lose the audience. Because even if the plot is good, the show still needs to be populated with characters to keep the audience fascinated with the story. And for the Rings of Power, the plot in of itself is barely strong enough to hold the attention of the audience, as evidenced by a lot of the exposition in the first 2 episodes. Which, I understand that some of it is necessary, you just need to strike a good balance and not make the exposition feel forced and unnatural. Because when it becomes clear that the writers are using the characters to drone on and explain things, people will get bored. Moving into another aspect that was surprisingly pretty flawed was the editing, because I noticed 3 big mistakes, and then every now and then, I would notice some minor mistakes in different scenes. Normally I wouldn't care if one mistake slipped by the editing bay, but it became kind of a recurrent issue. I noticed on 3 separate occasions that in a wide shot, you would hear the audio of a character talking, but visually, their mouth won't be moving.
I hear it said that when you cross over, you hear a song.
This might not be noticeable for everyone, but for this example, we can clearly see that this character is not talking.
Mighty sweet back of his well the other day.
Mighty sweet back of his well the other day.
I don't know how this can go unnoticed by so many different people behind the scenes at Amazon, especially since each episode has a budget of about $60 million. This is not something I would have expected to see in a blockbuster TV show, and I'm honestly kind of shocked. These are examples of me spotting wide shots of people not actually talking, but there are also some other minor and weird editing choices. Like in this scene where Galadriel and Elrond are talking on this mountain, there's a 2-shot of Galadriel and Elrond, where Elrond starts talking but he's out of focus. Normally in this type of shot, you would rack focus to Elrond, which means the point of focus would change from Galadriel to Elrond. But he stays out of focus, despite him being the subject in a shot who's talking. Now this technically isn't editing, it is more cinematography, but it's still a weird choice. If Galadriel was giving more of her performance and wasn't holding a single expression during the shot, then that could justify the focus remaining on her, but that isn't the case. Then in the same scene, there's a shot of Galadriel approaching Elrond as she's about to say something, but then it cuts to a top-down wide shot. The reason this doesn't make sense is because you're setting up that she's about to say something, so therefore you should hold a shot on her instead of suddenly cutting away. And these are just some examples out of the 2 episodes, and on a larger scale, this really brings down the quality of editing. Some people may not be able to put their finger on why it feels off, but it's a lot of unconventional minor editing mistakes that adds up over time. And again, for a big budget show, this is kind of crazy to me. For one last aspect, I want to look into the brief amount of action that was shown, and that's primarily the troll scene, which was in the first 20 minutes of episode 1, so spoilers for that scene. Firstly, the presentation of the troll was amazing. It being in the background slightly obscured by darkness creeping around genuinely increased the tension, so good job in that respect for building suspense. Then for one more good aspect, the VFX of the troll was great. It didn't look off at all, looked very high quality, and his integration into the environment and the interaction with people looked real. With the budget of the show, this is to be expected, but it's good nonetheless. But now we are getting into more of the negative aspects. The troll wrecking people looked great, however right when Galadriel shows up, the editing of the scene immediately becomes jarring. Like she's jumping around the troll slashing at him, but we can't really see the sword connecting at all due to the framing, lighting, and how fast it cuts away. These slashes are also supposedly severely damaging the troll since he's incapacitated after like 3 strikes. Which in of itself is kind of weird because shouldn't this big troll be much more resilient than that? Also, there's a shot of Galadriel slashing the leg of the troll, and while doing so, the troll is about to hit Galadriel but backs off after his leg gets hit. Which that doesn't make sense because why would her hitting his leg force him to stop an attack with his hands? From this, it seems like the troll is suddenly nerfed so that Galadriel can curb stomp him and come off as more of a badass. When in reality, it immediately confused me as to what the hell just happened and how that event was so easy. So the editing there was a bit janky, and looking at another action scene, which small spoilers towards the end of episode 2, we have an encounter with an orc. And again, the editing was very quickly cut and felt a bit jarring at times. It wasn't so bad to the point of it being incomprehensible, but it still wasn't very good. However, the execution of the orc being really strong and impacting the environment a lot was really cool. But so far, it doesn't scream $60 million in episode levels of good. Overall, the first 2 episodes is primarily just alright, And I don't want to be overly harsh because the character development could come later on since they did a lot of exposition in the first 2 episodes. Something that I'm loving within House of the Dragon is that they set up an ensemble of great characters within the same time the Rings of Power had. And now they're starting to ramp up the action and plot development. So in comparison, the Rings of Power is being outclassed a bit. Thank you for watching, and let me know what you thought of the first 2 episodes of the Rings of Power.